whispers of wisdom from ages past. Have you ever felt that the answers you are looking for might not be in the future, but buried somewhere in the past? That the solutions to our modern struggles were already discovered by giants who walked the earth centuries ago? There are certain lessons on inner strength hidden in the stories of those who faced impossible odds. They stared into the abyss of failure, persecution, and war. And they did not just endure, they found a way to transform their world. Let us reflect on a few of these lives, not just to recount their stories, but to see if we can understand their mindset and perhaps find a piece of wisdom we can carry with us. 1. Forging resolve in the darkest hour. The lesson from Winston Churchill. Our first lesson comes from a man who stood as a bastion against a tide of tyranny. His name was Winston Churchill, and his story speaks to a resolve that can be forged in the darkest of hours. Picture the year 1940. The world is holding its breath as Nazi Germany, a seemingly unstoppable force, consumes Europe. France is on the verge of collapse. Britain stands alone, with the threat of invasion hanging in the air like a storm cloud, and bombs beginning to fall from the sky. Morale has withered. Many in the British government, watching the grim reality unfold, believed the only logical path was to negotiate for peace, to surrender. This is the moment Churchill becomes Prime Minister. He was not a young man, and his political career was a long and complicated road. For the previous decade, he had been in the political wilderness, shunned and disliked, viewed by many as a renegade and a washout. His controversial stances had alienated him from his own party, and his persistent warnings about the rise of Germany were dismissed as alarmist. Some say his greatest strength in 1940 came from the very failures that could have broken him decades earlier. He knew adversity intimately. And what did he offer a terrified nation in his very first speech as their leader? Not false comfort. He offered the raw, unvarnished truth to a House of Commons still largely loyal to his predecessor. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Think about the strange power of that statement. At a time when people craved reassurance, he promised them struggle. He did not downplay the danger. He acknowledged their fear and then showed them the only path through it, relentless, defiant work. He was preparing them for the ordeal to come, not pretending it could be avoided. This became his defining style of leadership. He refused to cower. During the Blitz and nightly bombing raids on London, he would often go to the roof to watch, wanting to see the reality of the assault for himself. The next day, he would walk through the bombed-out streets, among the rubble and the grieving citizens. These were not photo opportunities. They were acts of communion. This was leadership by demonstration. The strength of Churchill was not in pretending the darkness was not there. It was in his ability to look directly into that darkness and convince an entire nation to face it with him. His words became their armor. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. This was more than a speech. It was a form of psychological warfare. He was building a fortress, not of bricks, but of human spirit. Later, in October of 1941, he spoke to a group of schoolboys at his alma mater, Harrow School, boys who would soon be soldiers, reminding them of Britain's resilience during the war. The future was still deeply uncertain. The students had added a new verse to the school song in his honor, and Churchill, moved, rose to speak. There, he delivered the essence of his philosophy: never give in. Never give in, never, 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 never in nothing. Great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. It seems the truest strength is not the absence of fear, but the quiet, deliberate decision to go on despite it. When the odds seem stacked against you, what happens when you decide not to yield to the apparent might of the enemy, whether it is a circumstance, a competitor, or the doubt in your own mind? You acknowledge the struggle, and then you resolve to simply not give in. From the battlefields of Europe, our search for strength leads us to the heart of a nation tearing itself apart, where the power of a leader was found not in avoiding failure, but in his capacity to endure it. 2. The Crucible of Failure. The path of Abraham Lincoln to greatness. Before he was the figure we know from monuments, Abraham Lincoln was, by most measures, a study in failure. His life suggests that the path to greatness is not always a climb, but a long, often painful, walk through setbacks. Consider the life of the man before he reached the presidency. He lost his job in 1831. He was defeated for the state legislature in 1832. His business failed a year later. The woman he loved, Anne Rutledge, died in 1835. He suffered a nervous breakdown in 1836, an episode of what was then called melancholy, so severe that his friends worried he was suicidal and removed his knives. He wrote to a friend, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth." This was a deep internal battle he fought his entire life, rooted in a childhood marked by loss. His political career continued its halting path, defeated in runs for Speaker, for Congress, for the Senate, and for the vice presidential nomination. Most people, faced with such a string of rejection and personal tragedy, might have concluded that a life of leadership was not for them. But for Lincoln, each failure seems to have been a lesson, not a verdict. Each loss refined his approach and strengthened his resolve. He was playing a much longer game. When he finally became president in 1860, he faced the greatest crisis in American history, the Civil War. His entire presidency was a trial by fire. He navigated opposition, not just from the enemy, but from within his own cabinet, a team of rivals composed of powerful men who initially believed they were better suited for the presidency than he was. He endured ineffective generals who frustrated his plans and immense public pressure as the war dragged on. Even his most famous act, the Emancipation Proclamation, was a lesson in persistence. He was pressured by abolitionists to act immediately, but felt constrained by the Constitution and the fragile loyalty of the border states, which still practiced slavery. His personal hatred of slavery had to be weighed against the pragmatic, desperate need to preserve the Union. His first attempts at gradual emancipation were rejected. The path forward was not a straight line, but a messy, frustrating process. He waited patiently for the right moment of military victory. After the Union Army halted the Confederate advance at the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln saw his chance. He issued a preliminary proclamation, a 100-day ultimatum for the rebellious states to return to the Union, or their slaves would be declared thenceforward and forever free. When the time came on January 1st, 1863, the final proclamation was a masterstroke of political and military timing. It was not perfect, as it did not free all slaves at once, but it was a decisive step that changed the moral fabric of the war and the course of history. It was the culmination of years of absorbing failures and persisting toward a moral imperative. Perhaps success is not a single event at all, but a process of enduring. The life of Lincoln asks us, what if our past failures do not define our future? What if every no is simply a lesson, and every setback is a chance to refine our path. The quiet strength to continue when it feels hopeless might be what separates a momentary defeat from an eventual victory. From a president who had to rebuild a nation, we turn to a man who had to first build himself from nothing. A man born into the deepest injustice, who forged his own freedom and became the voice for millions. 3. The Unchained Mind, the Inner Fortress of Frederick Douglass. Our third lesson comes from a man who, by the cruel logic of the world he was born into, should not have existed. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in 1818, a system designed to crush the human spirit. The story of Douglass is a profound lesson in the power of building your own inner world when the outer world offers only oppression. As a young boy, Douglass had a revelation. The wife of his owner began teaching him the alphabet, but her husband furiously stopped her, declaring that if a slave learned to read, it would make him unfit to be a slave. In that one moment, Douglass understood everything. Those words, he later wrote, sank deep into my heart. He saw that the path to freedom was through knowledge. Literacy was not just a skill. It was an act of rebellion. From then on, he resolved to learn, secretly and relentlessly. He ingeniously converted the poor white boys he met in the streets into his teachers, trading the bread he was given from the house for what he called that more valuable bread of knowledge. While his body was in chains, his mind did not have to be. He was constructing an internal fortress of intellect and self-respect. Douglass endured unimaginable brutality, including being sent to a slave breaker named Edward Covey, whose purpose was to crush the will of defiant slaves through relentless work and punishment. For 6 months, Douglass was broken. He wrote, "I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold a man transformed into a brute. But one day, something inside him shifted. When Covey tried to beat him, Douglass fought back. The two men struggled for nearly 2 hours. A brutal confrontation, it became the turning point of his life. Covey never touched him again." Douglass wrote, "You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man." He had rekindled the embers of his spirit. He had found a physical courage to match his intellectual fire. At age 20, he escaped to freedom. He could have lived a quiet life. Instead, he chose to use his freedom to fight for others. He became a towering figure in the abolitionist movement, a powerful orator whose eloquence was a living refutation of the ideology of slavery. His majestic presence and thundering voice captivated audiences, who found it hard to believe such a man had ever been enslaved. He published his autobiography and started his own newspaper, the North Star, with the motto, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and all we are brethren." He did not just escape slavery. He built himself into a leader and an intellectual on a foundation he laid himself in the darkest of circumstances. It suggests that the most enduring strength is the one we build inside. The life of Douglass poses a question. No matter our external situation, do we hold the power to cultivate our own mind, character, and will? When you build a powerful inner world, you become resilient to the storms of the outer world. Your circumstances might feel like a prison, but perhaps, like Douglass, you can forge the key to your own liberation from within. Our next figure also endured a prison, not for a few years, but for nearly 3 decades. His story teaches us perhaps the most difficult and most mysterious lesson of all, the strength found in letting go. 4. The Architect of Peace, the lesson in letting go from Nelson Mandela. For 27 years, Nelson Mandela was a prisoner. He spent 18 of those years on the notorious Robben Island, a maximum security prison designed to break the human spirit. The conditions were brutal. He was confined to a tiny concrete cell with a straw mat for a bed. He was forced to do hard labor in a lime quarry. Contact with the outside world was almost completely severed. He was allowed one letter and one 30-minute visit every 6 months. He was denied permission to attend the funerals of his own mother and his eldest son. The government that imprisoned him hoped he would be forgotten. They were wrong. Prison became his university, and he became a global symbol of the struggle for justice. While imprisoned, he refused multiple offers of conditional freedom. In 1985, President P.W. Botha offered him release on the condition that he renounce violence as a political tool. Mandela's refusal was read by his daughter Zinzi to a roaring crowd at a Soweto rally. The message was defiant and clear. What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter into contracts. His strength was in his unwavering commitment to his principles, even at the cost of his own liberty. But the most extraordinary display of his strength came after his release in 1990. After decades of unjust imprisonment, the world expected a man filled with bitterness. A civil war in South Africa seemed inevitable. Instead, the world saw something else entirely. Mandela chose the path of forgiveness and reconciliation. He seemed to understand a profound truth, that clinging to hatred would only keep his country and himself in chains. He famously said, "As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I did not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still be in prison." Forgiveness, for him, was not an act of weakness. It was the ultimate act of self-liberation. He knew that to build a new, democratic South Africa, he had to heal the wounds of the nation, not deepen them. He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It was not designed for revenge, but for restoration. Its purpose was to allow victims to tell their stories and perpetrators to confess their crimes, seeking amnesty in exchange for truth, in the hope of creating a shared understanding of the past to build a new future. And in a quiet, powerful symbol of his philosophy, he invited one of his former Robben Island jailers, Christo Brand, to his presidential inauguration, to share in the joy of the new nation he helped create. His life leaves us with a challenging thought. Forgiveness is not a gift you give your enemy. It is a gift you give yourself. True strength may lie in the ability to let go of bitterness. Holding on to anger keeps us prisoners of our own past. It prevents us from moving forward. Forgiveness does not mean condoning what happened. It means releasing its power over you. It is the key that unlocks the door from the prison of your own resentment. Our final lesson comes from a small man who took on the largest empire in the world, not with guns, but with the quiet, unshakable force of an idea. 5. The power of a gentle soul. The moral courage of Mahatma Gandhi. In the early 20th century, the idea that India could achieve independence from the British Empire seemed like a fantasy. How could an unarmed population stand against such military might? The answer came from Mohandas Gandhi, and his lesson is one of moral courage. The philosophy of Gandhi was satyagraha, a Sanskrit term he coined meaning holding firmly to truth. It is often translated as truth force or soul force. It was a form of non-violent resistance rooted in the belief that one must wean opponent from error by patience and compassion. This was not passive. It was an active, strategic, and deeply courageous form of confrontation, designed to conquer through conversion, creating a new harmony rather than a bitter victory. One of the most powerful examples was the Salt March of 1930. The British had a monopoly on salt and levied a heavy tax that hit the poorest Indians the hardest. In an act of profound moral challenge, Gandhi decided to defy the law. He and 78 followers set out to walk 240 miles to the sea to make their own illegal salt. As he walked, day after day, news spread like wildfire. Thousands joined the procession, which became like a white flowing river of people dressed in white homespun cloth. When he reached the coast 24 days later, he was leading a massive crowd. He walked to the shore, picked up a lump of salt-rich mud, and symbolically broke the law. This simple act sparked a wave of civil disobedience. Millions began making their own salt. The British arrested over 60,000 people. After Gandhi's arrest, the poet Sarojini Naidu led 2,500 volunteers in a peaceful raid on the Dharasana salt works. What happened next was witnessed by American journalist Webb Miller. He watched as columns of marchers walked forward peacefully, only to be met by police who brutally beat them with steel-tipped clubs. Miller wrote that the protesters went down like 10-pins, not even raising their arms to fend off the blows. His dispatches about the violence against the unarmed, unresisting demonstrators shocked the world and exposed the moral weakness of British rule. The strength of Gandhi was not physical. It was moral. He showed that you could challenge an empire by refusing to cooperate with its injustice. By willingly accepting suffering without inflicting it, the protesters seized the moral high ground and awakened the conscience of the world. It teaches us that perhaps the highest form of strength is moral courage, the willingness to stand for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming power. You may not need physical force to create profound change. You need a just cause, unwavering principles, and the courage to act on them. The quiet strength of the human spirit can be mightier than any empire. The echo of their strength. From the unbreakable will of Churchill to the quiet persistence of Lincoln, from the inner fortress of Douglass to the radical grace of Mandela and the peaceful defiance of Gandhi, these stories, carved into history, whisper a timeless truth. While our challenges feel unique, the nature of strength is universal. The human spirit has faced darkness before, and it has found a way through. The key, it seems, is not to be born without weakness, but to cultivate strength in spite of it. The secret is not to avoid the battle, but to know how to endure it. What was your favorite lesson? Is there another historical figure whose quiet strength inspires you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us end with a final thought, a reminder from the Stoic philosopher Seneca, who understood these principles 2,000 years ago. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. The figures we have reflected on today dared. Now, it is our turn. If these stories of resilience have inspired you, let's keep this journey going together. Tap the like button so more people can find these lessons. Subscribe to Thought 101 and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the wisdom we uncover here. And most importantly, share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these lessons spoke to you the most and why? Your voice matters, and someone out there might need to hear your perspective today. Thank you, and see you in other videos.